out. Linda Burney is the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians and also the Minister for Families, Shadow Minister for Families and Social Services. Linda Burney, good morning.
Good morning, Virginia. How are you?
Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us. I know that the federal government has been saying for some time, and Ken Wyatt, the Minister in particular, that they want this to succeed and they want this to advance as a universally held and appreciated thing. Have you been consulted on this? Is it being done in a bipartisan way?
Not particularly bipartisan. There is a joint parliamentary committee that meets on a fairly irregular basis. Mind you, Parliament hasn't been meeting to look at the work of the three working parties, and that is across the Parliament, including members of the Labor Party, Independents and the Liberal Party. But I have to say, Virginia, I am totally confused on where the government is at with this issue, because there has been so many mixed messages in the last week and a half in particular.
What's confusing you?
What's confusing me is that towards the end of Reconciliation Week, so it would have been about the 28th, 29th of May, Ken Wyatt said that he was not optimistic about a referendum to the Australian people to recognise First Nations people in the Constitution. And then on the Tuesday after that, he came out saying that he was optimistic, but it would be a referendum about recognising people, not entrenching a voice to the Constitution. And David Crow's article in the Sydney Morning Herald says a little bit of both. So I think it is very important, and I have called on the Prime Minister to make a definitive statement on exactly where the government is at in terms of, one, whether or not there's going to be a referendum and what it's going to be about, and two, whether they're talking about legislation to create a voice to the government or the Parliament. It is completely unclear.
Well, what we have this morning, according to the report that you've mentioned there by David Crow, is that what will be put to the community is some sort of mechanism for community input into what the voice, the Indigenous voice to Parliament, might end up looking like. Now, I know that sounds convoluted and vague, but that's only because I'm relying on what seems to be a rather vague report at the moment. Not to criticise David Crow, but the mechanism, so-called, is not clear. Is it clear to you?
It is not clear to me, which is why I think we need the Prime Minister to make a very clear and, as I said, Virginia, definitive statement on exactly where the government and the government's party room, importantly, is on this. I mean, is the Crow article today on the back of what the Prime Minister and the Minister, whom I have a great deal of respect for, saying, or is it the party room? Because I think that would be very different things. We know within the party room there is the government's party room, there is a wide range of views on this. And the last I understood, Virginia, is that the government was talking about a referendum to recognise people in the Australian Constitution and legislation to create a voice to the government, not to the Parliament. Of course, the Labor Party position is absolutely crystal clear, and it has been for a long time, is that we embrace the three elements of the Uluru Statement: an entrenched voice in the Constitution, which requires a referendum, a Makarrata Commission to oversee agreement or treaty making, and a national process of truth-telling.
Well, the government's postponed that part, which is the most contentious part, and which was rejected by then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, about entrenching a voice to Parliament. He always argued it would make the phrase he used was a third chamber. They've pushed that back, that referendum. So in the absence of there being a timeline right now for the referendum, what's the most useful thing that the government and also we as the voters can do?
Two points to that. Firstly, the most useful thing is the government needs to be crystal clear about the way it wants to move forward on this issue. And that would help all of us, including the general public, enormously. And whatever the mechanism is for a voice, it needs to be at least to the Parliament, not to just the government. That would downplay...
Tell me the distinction there in your mind.
Well, the distinction is that if it is a voice to the Parliament, it can advise all elements of the Parliament, the government, the opposition and the crossbenchers, and that's very, very important, particularly when we're seeking advice on we're all dealing with the same pieces of legislation. The second element is what does the referendum entail? Is it going to be entrenching a voice? The government says no, they won't do that, despite what David Crowe said this morning. And secondly, is there going to be a referendum about recognising First Nations people in the Constitution, which is very different to entrenching a voice? So that's what's absolutely unclear, and it wouldn't take very much for the government to clear it up. Tell us what your intentions are about a referendum and what it entails, and secondly, tell us what your intentions are about a voice to the Parliament. Now, just to finish that off, Virginia, my understanding is that the 3 working groups that Ken White has set up to advance this have been expressly told that they cannot consider what was in the Uluru Statement.
So that's done then? That's gone?
Well, it's gone in terms of this particular government. As I said, the Labor Party...
You're waiting for the Labor government, a Labor government to be returned in order for anything meaningful to be achieved here?
I just don't think we have that time. I mean, the outpouring on the weekend, wherever you stand in terms of the legalities and the health issues, was a reality. And the issue of deaths in custody is a real one. I'm very pleased that finally the government has said, I think over the weekend, that they are going to adopt a justice target in closing the gap. Labor has been calling on that since Mr Abbott was Prime Minister, and I am very pleased to finally see that they are going to do that. We also wanted a target on removal of Aboriginal children into statutory care as well, Virginia, which you'd be familiar with.
Indeed, and we should discuss that at length another time. We'll leave it there, Linda Burney. Thank you for making time for us today.
Thanks, Virginia.